So tonight, in jazz session number 8, we're going to talk about on being a dictator, using dictation to be a better writer. And we are going to talk about that specifically in the context of the book that I wrote with Kevin J. Anderson and Greg Vos. We'll see that coming up. But first,
I'm going to make him an offer again with you.
so as usual, yes, I'm giving these classes away for free, and I'm also hoping that I sell some books out of them. So today, normally on the right side, you see Making Story Models, my book on visual modeling for analyzing and planning stories. Um, and over on the left, usually we have some fiction. Today on the left, we have the book that I wrote with Kevin and Greg, a book on dictation methods that is largely the basis for this talk. And so there's a QR code for that. Over on the right, instead of making story models, this week we have some fiction because this book, Thrash Metal Homicide, episode 2 of Maxwell's Demons, just launched on Amazon today. So I'm proudly sharing it with the world. The Maxwell's Demons series is police procedural investigations on Mars in Maxwell City, hence the name, the largest city on Mars at this point in time. And it is the adventures of this team of investigators dealing with murder on Mars. This particular one is called Thrash Metal Homicide because the story starts out with an aging heavy metal, thrash metal rocker who has signed up for the equivalent of these rock and roll cruises you see where an oldies band goes on a cruise and meets all their adoring fans. He's doing a tour of Mars, and he's on the shuttle that's going to take him to the cycler that's going to deliver him to Mars, and discovers that his stalker is on the shuttle as well, because it turns out that restraining orders that are valid in 6 continents of the world are not necessarily valid on ships going to space. And so his stalker is back. And that's only the start of his misadventures. And it's what happens when she ends up dead, he ends up accused, and the demons have to find out what's really going on. So that launched today. It was on pre-order, so there were 29 already pre-ordered, and more sales have come in through today. So I'm very proud of this one. If you like mysteries, if you like Mars, this is one to take a look for. And my usual admonishment, we are talking about tools, not rules. If I tell you something is a rule, it's not. If anyone tells you anything is a rule other than you must write, it's not. It's a tool. Because as Goldman told us about screenwriting, nobody knows anything. Nobody has rules that are guaranteed to successfully give you a story or a movie that everybody's going to want to take in. If they knew everything would be a hit, which would mean nothing's a hit. So even though I'll sometimes call something a rule because I'm bombastic that way, it's still a tool. So today we are going to talk about on being a dictator. There is far more than an hour's worth of material here. Again, it derives from this book. It's great for inspiration. It's great for questions. And I will always answer your questions besides what's in the book. But many times the answer will be, oh, that's covered in the book. It's written by Kevin J. Anderson. You very likely are familiar with him. He has now dictated something in the neighborhood of 165 books. Of those, 56 were national or international bestsellers in several different worlds, his own and Star Wars, X-Files, Dune. He doesn't mention DC superheroes, but he's done some of those. And he and his wife, Rebecca Mesta, are the publishers of Wordfire Press, who published this book and many other helpful writing books and some nonfiction books, including my own book, Today I Remember. They're also some of the founding members of Superstars Writing Seminars, a great place to learn for your career. It's much more career-oriented than craft oriented, but they do have some craft. Joining us in this second edition, this revised edition, is my good friend Greg Vos, who is an author, instructional designer. He designs courses like this, only he's a professional at it, so he does a better job of it. And he is my personal audio consultant who has taught me so much about audio equipment and audio processing that when Kevin said, "Hey, we need to do a new version of this book talking about new tools," I said, "Okay, fine, but I want Greg to be a co-author too, because anything I answer about these tools will be just parroting what Greg told me." And Kevin said, "Well, then we better get Greg in here." So Greg is our co-author on this second edition. And there's myself. I've dictated 7 novels so far and more short stories than I can possibly keep track of. So we are people who have some real dedication to dictation. Um, Come in.
The police and the high-priced scientific help put it together just as I did. With the proper dosage of tranquilizer, the creature became manageable. It's a great.
When I'm dictating, part of my brain is back here. Some of you are way too young to have seen Kolchak the Night Stalker in first run. You might have caught him in reruns, certainly. It's a classic monster hunting investigative reporter series. And he always dictated his stories. It was for the purpose of the story they were telling, him talking to the recorder let him talk to the viewer and info dump and present personality and so on. And I got to tell you, when I'm driving the road down the road, sometimes talking a story into my recorder, I still feel like Carl Kolchak. This was my dictator when I was a kid. This is hardly a new idea, dictation. It's become a lot easier and more powerful in the modern world. Uh, we talk about Kolchak as a dictator. There are certainly also many real world dictators besides Kevin and myself and Greg. We happen to have Jenna has joined us, Jenna Ita, and she has taken off with her dictation. She is much faster and more productive than me. She put in the time to get to that point. Uh, uh, what was his name? Earl Stanley Gardner, who wrote the Perry Mason mysteries that the TV show and the movies were based on, was a dictator. Many, many people have dictated their fiction through the millennia. Uh, Even for that matter, Homer. He was a blind poet. He didn't write down his poems. Somebody had to listen to him tell these poems and write them down for him. When you decide you want to dictate, you really need to decide why you want to dictate. And these are just a couple of examples of inspiration, because I'm more productive. I do better storytelling when I'm dictating. Might be for your health. Kevin dictates while he's hiking. Productivity. I actually am faster dictating than I am typing. And it makes use of lost time, such as my hour drive each way to and from work. Why you dictate is going to be an important question we're going to be looking at. But there are some myths that also relate to dictation. And some of these myths are my fault, or at least I did a bad job of countering them for many years before this book. And I didn't stop and really think through them. And some of the common myths are, I tried it once, but it just didn't work for me. And that's the worst one, the one that I failed most miserably at. I would just say, I don't know, it works for me. I can't explain it. And I wasn't taking into account what it actually did and how it worked for me. That I had 9 weeks on my first dictated story of figuring out how to dictate. I had months and even years of getting good at it. The I tried it once, but it just didn't work for me is because you were trying something quick and perfunctory and said, I got nothing out of that, or it was too complicated, so you walked away. You didn't do that when you were a kid learning to talk. You kept at it when things didn't work. or learning to walk or whatever. You have to put in the time to get better at it. People feeling awkward, people are staring at me. Well, that one's not as bad as it used to be because today everybody is walking around talking into their phones. It's no longer weird to see somebody talking to themselves because you just assume they're talking to the phone. I am, but I'm talking to my phone. I'm not talking to a person on the other end. Same people will say it's just not natural. And I have to say right there, typing's natural. I want to see a show of hands. How many of you learned to type before you learned to talk? I've never seen anybody raise their hands on that one, other than smartasses who want to say, "Yeah, I'm raising my hand just because it's funny." Talking is the more natural way of communicating. But as we spend time with the tools of handwriting and typing, we get really good at them so that they feel natural, so that we get past the learning curve and we're into the just do it phase. Well, the dictation can get into the just do it phase too. And the I hate the sound of my voice one is something that I know happens. It's almost a cliche in the recording business of people hating the sound of their own voice. But my recommendation for tools and methods, you won't be listening to your own voice. Either a computer program will or another human will. You're not going to have to listen to your own voice. So going back to the why you're writing or want to dictate, the whys will determine the best methods and tools for you. So productive use of my driving time. That was my big reason at the start, that I had an hour drive each way and I needed to be able to make use of that time because I'm a programmer. I'm a bit of a workaholic. So I'd drive to work for an hour. I would work sometimes 9, 10, 11, 12 hours. I won't admit to longer, but probably longer. And then I've got an hour drive home. And then at that time, I had to feed my mom and feed the canary. And so I was looking at sometimes 16, 17-hour days. Where was I getting the writing time in? When I turned that driving time into dictating time, all of a sudden I was getting 2 hours a day of writing in. Now, how much did I get done in those 2 hours? We'll talk about that because over time it got really good. Hiking through the woods and being healthy and inspired. This is Kevin's typical day. He gets up in the morning, has a healthy breakfast with his wife, Rebecca. Then he steps out his back door and he is in the Rocky Mountains because that's where they live. And he hikes uphill as he dictates a chapter. Now he's a whole chapter up the mountain and he has to get home. I only know, well, short of just falling, I only know of one way to get home, which is to hike back down so he dictates another chapter. And he gets home and he takes those 2 files that he's just dictated, drops them in the email to his transcription service, and has a wonderful lunch with Rebecca. And after lunch, opens up his email and the stuff he sent them yesterday is ready to go. A habit he was able to maintain 6 days a week or more. He has recently, as the technology has caught up, he has started using a transcription tool instead of this transcription service. We'll talk about the pluses and minuses of those. So that's another reason why you might dictate. Another is you just like your quiet place to think out loud. You might have the late Terry Pratchett had this. He had health that made it in his later years difficult and eventually impossible for him to type. But while his mind was still sharp, he could still tell stories. You might dictate because you're a slow typist. I got to say, I'm really doing well if I can hit 18 words a minute typing. You might just like to tell stories more than you like to type, more than you like to write. The act of telling is more productive for you. 2 months ago now, was it 2 months? Wow. 2 months ago now, I went to the Niles Renaissance Fair. No, a month ago. Yeah, it was in May. Went to the Niles Renaissance Fair with a performance I called the Instant Bard. And I talked to the audience and ask them a few questions and turn around and make their questions into a story that I tell live on the spot that didn't ever exist before I told it. I like the act of storytelling. It is creative and liberating for me. So there are lots of reasons why you might dictate, and how you dictate depends in part on why you dictate. Now, when you're starting out with dictation and you're like, this feels odd and awkward, maybe you're trying too much too soon. Kevin recommends baby steps. And I went through these baby steps. I didn't realize I was going through them at the time. But my first dictated project was these baby steps that I was just trying to figure out how the process works. So I'd be making notes, I'd be making sketches, I might be dictating an action scene or a conversation, dictating things that came to me completely out of order. I might dictate the backstory for my characters. I might just dictate out loud, just of, I wonder what's coming up here. What if this were to happen instead? I was just using it essentially to capture my thinking out loud about the story. I was doing more thinking about than telling. Now, over the course of 9 weeks, I started getting better. I was telling the story out of order, and we'll talk about that. But I was getting the pieces in place that I could turn into the story. Dean Wesley Smith, one of my mentors, likes to hammer on the fact that the order you tell the story doesn't have to be the order they read the story at all. So I was telling the story out of order as pieces came to me, which made it very comfortable that I could dictate any time. I just needed to dictate what was in my brain right then, as opposed to fixating on, I have to do the next thing. The next thing that the story needs. It's like, no, I'm going to tell the thing that I need right now because my brain sees it. And later on, I can put those pieces together. Today, I can pretty much dictate a novel in order, absolute consecutive order. But at that time, as I was learning, it didn't matter what order it was in. It was whatever pieces worked. And then later on, I started getting into dictating the finished prose. You might work from outlines, you might dictate your outlines. You might extract notes that you're going to work from and then dictate from those. So you've got these notes, now I'm going to dictate the details. And your goal here, and this is where I think a lot of people get stymied, they want it to be perfect as opposed to a good first draft. And that's all you should be looking for out of your dictation, is a good first draft. Now, it might be a great first draft. With polish and practice, I'm going to let my ego flow here. My first drafts are damn good, but they're not perfect. That second pass where I clean them up also lets me think about the story and make them better. So when you're at a point of dictating your finished prose, don't try to get it perfect. Don't beat yourself up because the computer heard the wrong word. Don't beat yourself up because you had to say a sentence over again because you messed it up. Just aim for that good first draft. Then, when you're done and you're in the cleanup phase, you'll polish it up. But you're not trying to be polished now. You're trying to be progressing through the story. Now, a lot of Kevin's notes talk about working from an outline because Kevin is a heavy outliner. I'm a pantser. I am an unabashed, unashamed pantser. I write from the seat of my pants. Back in 2023, Jenna and the fine folks at FireCon put up a prompt a day in October for flash fiction. Only I don't write flash. I just go too long for flash. So I wrote a short story a day. And around day 5 or 6, I started discovering that even though these were on 4 separate worlds, there was a way to turn them into one novel. So I proceeded to push, or prompted by the prompts, I proceeded to build a novel over the course of a month. And it was all improvisation up until about day 21 or 22. I started seeing the ending and I had an aim point, but it was still every day. What's going to happen now to get me to that aim point? So, pantsing, or some people prefer to call it discovery writing, they say calling it pantsing is undignified. Well, I'm undignified. Deal with it. Discovery writing is perfectly suited for dictation. I know because I did it. What you need to do is say, well, I need a few things to get me started. And this is not anything new to my talk here. This is classic story structure, character in a setting with a problem. You give me those, and I'm off and running. And then exploring through the eyes of the character, through the problem, through their senses, I am starting to build a world. And this is what I do with the Instant Bard. I dictate without a net. I get some prompts from the audience that will give me a character and a setting and a problem, and I'm off and telling the story. And I'm telling it live before their eyes, and they're hearing the story. Literally, no one has ever heard this story before. Now, I've been doing this now more than 10 years. So I've got real good practice at this. I'm not saying this is something you should aspire to right away, but you can aspire to this ability to just tell a story. If pantsing is your normal mode of operating, if you can pants at the typewriter, you can pants out your mouth. That sounded weird. So this, in fact, is my dictation method. My method, not the method. I sit down in my Jeep Liberty, the Aldrin Express. I plug in my recorder into the Jeep's audio and plug in the microphone. I'm putting in the Jeep's audio because I want to hear what I'm saying in the background. Because sometimes things don't work, sometimes batteries fail, sometimes cords get jiggled. So I want to hear that the audio quality is good because I don't want to proceed to dictate an hour of great stuff and lose it. I also have this theory that Coleridge was a putz. If you're familiar with Coleridge and Kubla Khan, the grand, beautiful, epic poem that he had in an opium dream one day, and he woke up and started writing it down, and somebody showed up at the door and knocked and interrupted him. And when he came back, it was all gone. And all he did was write and whine and complain about how he'd lost this wonderful, world-changing poem. I don't believe it. I think it was something that seemed really impressive to him coming out of his dream. And he didn't have the diligence to stick with it and capture it again. If I lose something, I turn around and I dictate it over again. Because Coleridge was a putz. But I plugged it in so I can hear it. I play back the last 5 minutes from the day before, which I call seating myself in the story. Then I do a microphone check, make sure it's picking things up, start the recorder, put the Jeep in gear, and start driving and talking. Notice, start the recorder and then drive. I want to be hands off the recorder while I'm driving. And now as I'm driving and I'm dictating, sometimes I'm going to have long pauses because I'm thinking. Doesn't matter. Sometimes I'm going to stumble and I'll have to say things again. Sometimes I say things again because I've got more than one idea of how it ought to sound, and I'll clean all of that up in the transcription phase. In the cleanup phase, I will pick out the best sentence out of all of that. I once watched a Ron Howard masterclass on directing. Now, I've never had the slightest interest in film directing. I will never be a film director. Ron Howard put together such a great teaser for this class that I had to watch the class just to see what he had to say, because a lot of it's about storytelling, not just about directing. But one of the things he talked about was his style of directing, which he contrasted with Clint Eastwood. Clint Eastwood is essentially shoot the scene next, shoot the scene next, shoot the scene next. Ron Howard is shoot the scene, shoot the scene, shoot the scene, shoot the scene. He might do the same scene 5 or 6 times, not because anyone did anything wrong. And he has to make sure the cast understands this. It's because he wants lots of choices when he goes into the editing room, which for him is where the story really happens. So I've got lots of choices on these scenes. He can stitch together the best parts into this movie that he puts on screen. This is kind of what I'm doing when I record the sentences more than once. When I see something that I think, yeah, that didn't sound right. Let me try this again. And then in cleanup, I will pick out the bits and pieces that work best. So I'm dictating now, editing later. So this is my method, my most common method of dictating. I can also dictate while I'm hiking. I can dictate on the treadmill. I can sometimes, horror of horrors, I can dictate sitting in a chair in my quiet house, not moving at all. But normally I am in motion when I'm dictating. I do have to, for my method, I have to keep in mind in many jurisdictions, it is illegal to have your ears covered while you're driving because they want you to be able to hear the people honking at you because there's an emergency. And certainly it is illegal in most jurisdictions in the US to have your hands and eyes on a device while you're driving, which is why I prefer a recorder with tactile buttons as opposed to phones, because there's some good recording software on phones. And phones are these glass screens that you can't feel what you're touching. You have to pick them up and look at them. If you're recording on a hiking trail or in your comfy office, that's not an issue. But if you are recording while you are driving down the road, you better have tactile buttons. Oh, and the picture on the side. The picture on the side is a map of Lake Michigan and a trip I took. On my third novel, I was behind my schedule for reasons no one would judge me for at all. My mom had died. That kind of really took me out of things. Oh, and when I was trying to cope with my mom's death, I did stupid things of I'm just going to walk and walk and walk and walk. And I walked 20 miles in 3 days and I gave myself a blister that put my feet at risk. And so they said, you're not walking anywhere for the next month. So I couldn't walk. I wasn't driving because I wasn't going to work because I was supposed to stay off my feet. And I was in no frame of mind to dictate, to tell the story. And one weekend, as it was coming up, I said, you know, I'm going to miss my publication date. And no one at the publisher is going to blame me. No one is going to hold this against me because my mom just died. But I also know the business of publishing. You miss that date, you get pushed back to the next open slot, which you don't know any idea where it's going to be or when it's going to be. You don't know what's going to happen in so many ways on the production front. And one weekend, I just said to myself, it's time. I need to catch up. And I got in my Jeep and I gassed up and I started driving all the way around Lake Michigan. And I wasn't dictating the whole time because you need a break here and there. But in the course of almost exactly 1,000 miles, which I found an interesting coincidence, I dictated 50,000 words over 2 days because I was in my happy place as far as dictation goes. I was in the place where dictation happens, where story happens. And I trained myself through long habit that this is what I do when I'm behind the wheel. Now, I lose that habit often. I've lost it recently because I'm, again, not doing a lot of driving. But I put myself there and said, it's time to dictate. Let the habit take over. 50,000 words later, I had the story almost done. For my road diction, again, this is not the gear you must have. This is the gear I use, and I will explain some of the reasons why I use it. One is I use my writing office over there on the side, the Jeep Liberty Express, or the Aldrin Express, I call it, because that's the name of a ship in one of my series. That is my writing office. When I am there and actually put on my gear, story happens. But my gear needs to be, first of all, safety first in mind. The Sennheiser ME32 head mic with the cardioid capsule does not block my ears It is very highly directional and stable, so it blocks out all the road noise and engine noise. So I get much higher quality dictation. On the other hand, it costs 180 bucks. You can get some pretty good quality on your cell phone today that's essentially free because you've already got the phone. I used to use an Olympus digital voice recorder. I started using the Zoom F1 field recorder, which is 300 bucks instead of the 60 bucks of the Olympus. But there was a reason why. This is all very technical reasons. If you're not using the equipment I am and the reasons I am, you can choose many other choices. In my particular case, that Sennheiser microphone had a screw nut on the end of the plug. The Olympus voice recorder did not, and what that meant was it never fully seated. And it was okay when I was driving down the road, but when I hiked with the recorder in my pocket, that cord could work its way out and I would never know that I was dictating nothing. So I got the more expensive recorder, which has the matching screw nut, but it also has the features that I looked for. Very simple operation with tactile buttons. Tactile buttons is important so that as it's sitting beside you on your console as you're driving, you can reach down and touch it with no more loss of focus than you would reach down touching your car heater stuff. It's a very simple interface to just quickly touch and start stuff up. It has a microphone nut with the jack with the locking nut. It has an audio output jack so I can plug it into my Jeep and notice how it is playing or not playing. It is not voice activated. Kevin has experimented with voice activated recorders and he hates them because he usually loses the first half a line or more of what he says as the recorder's figuring out, oh, somebody's talking, I better record. He doesn't want to rely on the software to do that. He pushes a button when he's ready to record. That's my gear. There are many other choices, including we're going to demonstrate just the computer itself because we're going to demonstrate in this nice, simple, quiet office environment where I don't have to worry about driving. So you've got many choices, but it's going to depend on how you're dictating what's the best equipment for you. Now, Kevin used to do exclusively a transcription service. I have used and will occasionally on a really noisy recording, we'll still use a human transcription service because humans have better ability to make out noisy conversation than even the best algorithms today. But you have to be very careful about this. I've found this that people will say, I'd love to do that until they actually do it. Even some who do it for a living, they start realizing that doing it for pay to help somebody out is a lot of work. I've lost a couple of typists who they're perfectly capable and they just couldn't keep up with me. So if you are looking for transcription services, shop around, get good ones who are not just willing, but qualified. And you also have to be aware. If it is a really good price, really good deal, it is very possibly that you've got somebody who's going to take your files and hand them to transcription software. They're going to tell you that a human typed it, but they're just handing it to transcription software. They're charging you for what you could have done yourself. So you want a place with a good reputation. Now, when you work with the same place over and over again, as Kevin has, they can learn your habits. They can even learn your names of your characters in your fantasy and so on. So the human typists are really good. Kevin's recommendation was a service called WeScribeIt. Again, it's not programs, it's humans who are native English speakers, because sometimes you'll find that certain idioms don't work well with people who haven't learned American idiomatic English. Now, Kevin recommended WeScribeIt. I do not. And I'm going to tell you why Kevin recommends them and why I do not. Kevin recommends them because they have been working with him for, I don't know how long, 20 years. They're really good to him, and they grandfathered him in on a rate plan you and I can't get. There are two rate plans out there in general for transcription services: per word or per minute. We Scribe It gives Kevin a per word rate. You and I, we're going to get a per minute rate. Now, if I were in that business, I would charge per minute. You'd lose your shirt. I don't know how some of these places like iDictate, which we'll talk about next, I don't know how they get away with it. Because if I am driving down the road, sometimes I am sitting there flying and I can sometimes go several minutes without having said a useful word as I'm thinking. If they're charging per word, I'm not getting charged for those 5 minutes of nothing. But the typist has to listen to them just in case I say something. They have to go through and pay attention to that. Now, they might use filter programs and so on that kind of point them to it, but they still have to go through all that dead air just to be sure it's dead air. So I think that they have to get paid for listening to my dead time if I were running that business. But if I am paying for that business, I want iDictate.com because they charge per word. Now, their price has gone up since I started using them. It used to be 1.25 cents per word. Now it's 1.5 cents per word. And if I have a really noisy file, they are well worth that 1.5 cents a word because they will pull out meaning that is extremely hard for software to pull out. And iDictate also very specifically qualifies their typists. They have another service, I forget what the name of it is, but it is essentially for quick voicemail and text messages and so on, that you call them up and say, set up an appointment with the bricklayers next week. That was less than 30 seconds of text, and it just has to be typed cleanly. When iDictate hires people, they hire them in their other company that does these short text messages. And if they have proven themselves in that environment and proven, they qualify to be transferred to iDictate where they get paid better. And the service that I get from iDictate is just wonderful. And it's 1.5 cents per word. And I consider it in those cases to be worth the price. But that price really adds up. So I'm going to talk about my solution, my transcription software, and then we'll look at some of the other options. I use Dragon Naturally Speaking Professional, which when I started using it was $150. When I first built these slides was $300. It is now $700, and I don't expect a single one of you to use it at $700. I will make the case at the bottom of the slide of how it still pays for itself. For me, with my level of productivity, it pays for itself, but I've already paid for it. If I had to pay for it again tomorrow, it'd be a tough call. It is just so much that they're trying to concentrate now on high-end professional business, not on the casual user. It is no longer available on Macintosh. They dropped their Mac support with, I think, version 13. They have a cheaper version called Dragon Home, although that may have been phased out. Dragon Home is perfectly good if you want to talk to the computer and it transcribes as you talk. Dragon Professional lets you dictate now and transcribe later. It does really good if you speak your punctuation, comma, and your line breaks, comma, and other similar things, period. Dragon 15, comma, however, comma, will interpolate punctuation, period, and sometimes does a good job of it, dot, dot, dot. I have gotten really good at speaking punctuation to the point where sometimes I do it even when I shouldn't. But it's one of those things in the learning curve that's hard to get used to. It will be confused by noise, which is why I have the high-end microphone. It really gives me with the high-end microphone and the good recorder, gives me a clean first draft. Now, let me look at the math here and why I say I'm glad I spent the $700. If I am dictating my worst day, I'm going to get 25 words per minute. Worst day. If I'm dictating for an hour, that means I'm getting 3,000 words on my worst day going back and forth to work. If I look at 0.015 cents or $0.015 per word, not cents per word, 1.5 cents per word. If I look at $0.015 per word times 3,000, that's $45 a day. If I take Dragon and the microphone and the recorder for 1,100 bucks, 26 days of transcription and of dictation to transcription will cost me more than my hardware setup. 1 month. So I think it's well justified, but I'm going to be showing you options that are cheaper, significantly cheaper. And so therefore, you don't have to worry about paying Dragon for their amount, because I know it's paid for, and it still is absolutely a bite to try to pay that much up front. So let's talk about transcription tools. There are a couple of things you need to look at in your transcription tools. One is local versus web-based, and one is phone versus recorder versus computer. Local versus web-based. Web-based is really powerful because it's not your computer doing the work. It's some server in Seattle or Timbuktu or Ocala, Florida, or who knows where, but some really powerful server. So it's really good, but it only works when you're connected to the web. The ones that I've tried early, and I haven't looked for ones recently, so this may have changed, but they don't let you know when you're disconnected. Dragon, who makes the high-end tool, also makes an online web-based tool that is relatively cheaper, but you pay by the month. Eventually it adds up. But the real problem I had with the tool is I can't tell when I'm connected or not. And I live out in the boondocks, an hour away from civilization. I go through long stretches of the road where I don't have cell signal. I know for some of you that's really shocking, but I don't have cell signal for good chunks of my commute home. And when I lose cell signal, it stops recording. And when I pick cell signal back up, it does not start recording again. So I'm driving down the road talking, and nope, I've lost the cell signal. I've lost the recording. It doesn't even let me know unless I pick the thing up and look at it all the time, which is not a safe thing to do. So that is a huge risk with web-based. So if you're looking at web-based tools, see what happens if you lose connection, but maybe you live in one of those environments where that just never happens. On the other hand, local runs on your computer. It's very controlled and secure. Doesn't care if you have a web connection or not. I know a few people who are required because of the security restrictions of their work, if they're in military or something like that, that they have to very carefully restrict what goes across the web to public servers. And they cannot use a web-based tool for that reason. They must use a local tool. So reasons and advantages for local versus web-based. There are reasons and advantages for phone versus recorder versus computer. Modern phone tools, phones have great microphones. Fantastic microphones. You can't get a phone anymore with a chintzy microphone. But all phone tools that I have seen are web-based. You just don't have enough processing power in a phone to do the actual voice recognition. Recorders are very good, especially for your local tools. Single purpose, simple, tactile buttons again. Computers, you can use either local or web-based, depending on what you're doing. And we'll look at a web-based solution before we finish up here. Again, some tools, but less and less as the tools get more advanced, require you to actually speak the punctuation. Again, I've gotten used to it and I kind of like it because I get exactly the punctuation I want as opposed to what some AI somewhere guessed. You can create custom vocabularies. I'm too lazy to ever do that. You can train the software to your voice for some of them. And I did do that one, which is an interesting thing, because they say you should train it in the environment where you're going to use it most. The environment where I'm going to use the software most is driving down the road at 70 miles an hour in my 2008 Jeep with all of its noises and wind going by and everything. And how do you train that while you're driving? So I had my sister drive my Jeep while I read training passages for an hour. Thank you, Anita. So training the software can really help on the Dragon side, particularly. Most of the modern tools don't require you to train the software. I want that extra bit of accuracy. And some of them have built-in editing tools that will let you go in and after the fact, using voice, you can edit what you've typed. I never use them. Terry Pratchett, who had lost most of his motor ability when he was dictating, he used the spoken editing tools for cleaning up his text because he had to. He had to learn it. I haven't had to learn it yet. So those are some things to consider on your transcription tools. These are some of the tools available to you today. And it's a huge list. It's just a huge list. And I guarantee that there's a bunch I've missed. Dragon, we talked about. It's local. It will transcribe audio files that recorded previously. Excellent accuracy, top-notch editing and training, only for Windows computers and expensive. Dragon Anywhere is their web-based tool for iOS and Android. Supports a lot of the editing features of Dragon that I don't use. Accuracy is excellent because, again, it's a huge server someplace that's doing the actual transcription. It has the issues that we have with web-based. That A, it's not necessarily private, and B, you don't have any indication of when you've lost connection, and if you're running it on your phone, you don't have tactile buttons. Otter AI, which is really designed for meetings, is an interesting choice because you can have a meeting with yourself and talk to yourself, and Otter will transcribe it, even though they intended it for meetings, and does some interesting stuff with identifying speakers and so on. Otter is really simple to use. Once you learn how to use the tool for meetings, you're essentially meeting with yourself. The cost is about $8.33 per month. It's actually an annual rate, but free for 300 minutes a month. That's a lot. Trent is an interesting one, partly because it's cross-platform. It's $60 a month. And, it don't take many months to add up to the cost of Dragon at that point. Whisper. Whisper is actually multiple things. Whisper is a tool that was built as a general purpose transcription tool and then was adapted into a Mac version, which is what Kevin is now using because the results are so good and it's direct and fast. It's also available as TurboScribe, which is a web-based tool. And the Mac Whisper, it's like, I want to say Kevin said it was $45 to buy it. It's something under 100, definitely. TurboScribe is free for up to 30 minutes per day. After that, you start getting into a per month billing process. When you're starting out, 30 minutes per day is probably the most you're going to be dictating anyway. As you get better at it, 30 might not be enough for you. ProseWrite is a new tool built by a person who knows Kevin professionally through the business. It is $10 a month. It's really good. And in my tests with it, it is better than TurboScribe. Is it $10 a month better? Yeah, I'm doing most of my work with Dragon, so if I need to do something else, I'll probably use TurboScribe in 30-minute chunks. I mentioned Otter AI. You can today, in most of the meeting tools, Zoom, Teams, WebEx, most of them will do transcripts. Why I had to say that twice on this slide, I don't know. But I did say it twice on this slide. But they will do meeting transcripts that aren't bad. I think Otter AI does it better, but they're all doing it and getting better at it. iPhone will actually do dictation. I assume Android will as well, but my experience is all with iPhone. That you have an on-screen keyboard and a microphone button. You can speak text into any document. Again, you're web-based. Again, you're on a phone, so it's not ideal if you're driving or if you are having to worry about security, but that's the option there. I assume the Android dictation is very similar. Um, Google Docs in Chrome has a dictate button that will do, again, a web-based transcription tool. Microsoft Word, and people like to say that Microsoft never really innovates, they only market. And in my experience, it's almost exactly the opposite. Microsoft Word has had dictation built in since about 2002, and very few people know it's there because Microsoft never talks about it. And this is a powerful tool with powerful editing commands, and it's already paid for on most modern versions of Word. Jenna has joined us, and I mentioned Jenna was a Dictator, very productive. This is what Jenna is using. She didn't pay $600, $700 for Dragon. She's doing it with Word, the tool she already has, and getting phenomenal productivity out of it. Not every version of Word has it, and I can't keep track of which one does and which one doesn't. But if you already have it, then you don't need to worry about these other options. You've got something that will work on your tools, on your computer, depending on if it meets your needs for dictating now and transcribing later. So there's a lot of options out there and more all the time. So let's give a quick demonstration of this process. Where is it? Where is it? Come on. There it is. Tiny fonts. So this is a simple demonstration with just Windows Voice Recorder. It was hot that day. Hotter than anyone warned me. Hotter than the sun? Well, no, but it sure felt like it. And that big ball of gas was hanging right there outside the window, reminding us that if we weren't careful, it was going to get a lot hotter. Mary looked over at me and said, "No sign of a CME yet, period." Yet? She nodded. Yet. But the magnetic traces are suspicious. We could be seeing a flare coming. We'd better get out of the way. So, there was a tiny little example of me improvising the story on the fly. That was recording 51, recorded today at 8:58 p.m. I want to open that file location because I never remember where Voice Recorder stores its stuff. I'm going to copy that. And then I'm going to come over here to TurboScribe and say I want to transcribe some files. And I say, I want you to get these files from here. And recording 51, we said that was correct. Hello. There it is. open that. They give you options of a fast transcription, medium, or slow but really accurate. I always go slow but really accurate. I'm not in a rush. And I transcribe, and it's going to say, hey, we're uploading this. Now we're going to transcribe it, and they will proceed to send me email when it's done. This is short enough that we can pretty much just watch it because it was only 59 seconds. And here it is. It is finished transcribing. And I open the transcript. That's pretty darn good. There are no real places there where I'd say it was completely wrong. Its choices of where to do line breaks, they're okay. I might have put them in different places. Again, with Dragon, I choose that explicitly. But that's a pretty good transcript for something I just said on the fly. And what I found is TurboScribe does a really good job with noisy transcriptions. So if I am going someplace and I have to make a note because something came to me and I don't have all my equipment with me, but I have my phone, I can stop and take out the phone and dictate stuff with the engine running, with other traffic zipping by on the highway. Not that I've done this often, it's kind of foolish. I'd rather get off the highway, but all of these conditions where it can be hard to record, and Dragon with my good microphone might have issues if it's noisy enough. TurboScribe does a pretty good job. And then every once in a while it goes completely insane and it'll take what seems to me like an ordinary clear transcription file or recording and it will transcribe it just completely missing everything. Um, no tool is perfect, but this is a pretty good one. Come on, come on, come on. There we go. So that was a quick demonstration. If I tried different tools, the mechanics would be slightly different, but the process is really pretty good today. So that's what we have. This is actually a slightly shorter one than I expected. It depends sometimes on how long that demonstration runs. Sometimes it turns around and bites me. We will have coming up next week, we'll be talking about world building through accretion, building your world as an as-needed basis. Great for us pantsers. July 6th, we will be talking about story lengths by genre and ways to try to hit particular lengths, whether to write shorter or write longer. On the 13th, we'll be talking about the goal game, how to ask stories or ask questions about your story to figure out in a sort of structured, planned game, figure out what your story's about. The 20th, we'll be talking about frame stories and other nonlinear narratives. The 27th, we'll be talking about the 4 levels of learning. August 3rd will be another tribute episode. This time we will be tribute to Dean Wesley Smith, who I seem to reference just about every session that I teach. August 10th, we'll be looking at distance and scope in space. 17th, we'll be looking about learning from improv, lessons from improv that certainly apply to pantsers, discovery writers, but there are things we can learn from improv for all writers. August 24th, we'll be looking at the Bradbury method. I call it panning for gold, how Bradbury wrote his greatest works and what you might learn from that. And the 31st, we're going to be looking at the progression of learning through topics, the ways you absorb the skills. And finishing up, again, these are my 2 books that we wanted to talk about this week. On Being a Dictator, that this book talk is based on, and Maxwell's Demons, my new novella on Kindle for police procedural on Mars. So, questions about dictation and why can't I stop that music? There. Hey, I said stop. All right. It just is insisting on giving us music. Any questions for this week?
Hey, Barn, I got one. The Zoom F1 field recorder that you have.
Yep.
You said you take that on hikes. How is that sweat resistant?
Um, I usually, when I take it on hikes, I am taking it in a pouch. So that makes it more sweat resistant, certainly.
Yeah.
Um, and I do like my Zoom F1. However, they are notorious for the battery lid popping open, and you have to kind of do some manual surgery on them to make sure the battery lid doesn't pop open. That's actually a bigger risk than the sweat issue.
Gotcha.
But
Thank
I
you.
carry a belt pouch for my recording gear, and sweat is only one of the reasons.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah. Other questions? All right. If there are no other questions, my biggest lesson I want to leave out of this is it will get easier with practice. So if you think this would be helpful for you, give yourself time. I had literally 9 weeks, the first story that I dictated, 9 weeks to get anything out of it that I felt like was good. But you know what? That story went off to analog and they immediately bought it. And that story then was chosen by Gardner Dozois, the late Gardner Dozois now, but chosen by Gardner for a year's best science fiction, volume 31. So I did something right with that first story dictated. It was a struggle, it was a learning experience, but when all was said and done, it worked. So give yourself some time on it. All right. If there are no more questions, let me stop the share.
Thank
And I
you. That was
thank
really
you all.
helpful.
Thank you, Bex. And I will stop our recording. Okay, yes.